Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Lehigh University's first ever TEDxLehighU as part of our reunion programming this weekend. We're happy to have you here. Thank you for joining us in this intellectual experiment. A lot of our educational programming that we incorporated into reunion and commencement weekend this year is brand new. And we're happy to hear that so many people decided to come out and join us for this. This afternoon, we'll be hearing from 6 speakers live and 3 other talks that are being recorded and piped in for us. Jim, Kristen, Casey, Bryan, George, and Seth are going to share some thoughts with us about enhancing the world in which we live. Those of you who have a nice, strong Lehigh lineage know that the Lehigh University motto is Homo Minister et Interpretus Naturae, man, servant, and interpreter of nature. How appropriate that a talk like this on enhancing the world in which we live is happening in this place, in this campus. We're very happy to have you here. And just a couple more thoughts to frame the conversation today. We're going to begin with a brief intro video on what the TEDx concept is. For those of you who have never been to a talk like this before, TEDx talks are very short, usually 6 to 12 minutes in length, very energetic. A lot of that depends on you, the audience, providing your feedback, your enthusiasm, certainly your applause when somebody says something that you really like. Please feed your energy back to the stage so that our presenters today are equally involved in your enjoyment of the event. Following the intro video, we're going to do 2 pre-recorded videos immediately thereafter. These are TEDx presentations that we found online that also fit the theme of the afternoon. Now, thinking about enhancing the world in which we live, a couple months ago, March 2012, this planet surpassed a population of 7 billion beings. 14 billion pairs of eyes, 7 billion brains, all with their own thoughts, their own actions, their own lives, their own experiences. What can we as a Lehigh community do to make this world that we're all sharing together a better place? Our presenters cross all 4 colleges here at Lehigh. They're staff members, they're faculty members, we've got students and alumni. With 6 people, we managed to cover all 8 of those demographics, which is pretty impressive. So I hope you enjoy the conversations this afternoon. I hope what you hear is stimulating and provokes further thought and conversation, both this afternoon and in the days, weeks, months, and years to come. And we hope to see you back here again next year when we do even more of these talks. And please be very verbose with your feedback on how the events of this afternoon go. With that said, I'm going to step off stage and we will begin with the TEDx intro and 2 brief videos, and I'll be back in a moment. Thank you.
Now today, you're part of a truly remarkable global phenomenon. Around the world, thousands of people have been gathering in meetings to experience the power of ideas. The surprising thing about today's meeting is that we here at TED have had almost nothing to do with it. We lent our name, our format, a few simple guidelines, and some of our content. But the really hard work to make today happen has been down to your local organizers, and we're truly in awe at the passion and dedication that they have shown to make something like this work. A thank you to you too for taking the time out to come and be part of this exciting conversation about our shared future. Now please write and tell us what you make of the event today. But for now, on with the show.
So ladies and gentlemen, at TED we talk a lot about leadership and how to make a movement. So let's watch a movement happen, start to finish, in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons from it. First, of course you know, a leader needs the guts to stand out and be ridiculed. But what he's doing is so easy to follow. So here's his first follower with a crucial role. He's going to show everyone else how to follow. Now notice that the leader embraces him as an equal. So now it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Now there he is calling to his friends. Now if you notice that the first follower is actually an underestimated form of leadership in itself. It takes guts to stand out like that. The first follower is what transforms a lone nut into a leader. And here comes a second follower. Now it's not a lone nut, it's not two nuts, 3 is a crowd, and a crowd is news. So a movement must be public. It's important to show not just the leader, but the followers, because you find that new followers emulate the followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, and immediately after, 3 more people. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point. Now we've got a movement. So notice that as more people join in, it's less risky. So those that were sitting on the fence before now have no reason not to. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, but they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. So over the next minute, you'll see all of the those that prefer to stick with the crowd, because eventually they would be ridiculed for not joining in. And that's how you make a movement. But let's recap some lessons from this. So first, if you are the type, like the shirtless dancing guy, that is standing alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals. So it's clearly about the movement, not you. Okay, but we might have missed the real lesson here. The biggest lesson, if you noticed, did you catch it? Is that leadership is over-glorified. That yes, it was the shirtless guy was first, and he'll get all the credit, but it was really the first follower that transformed the lone nut into a leader. So as we're told that we should all be leaders, that would be really ineffective. If you really care about starting a movement, have the courage to follow and show others how to follow. And when you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first one to stand up and join in. And what a perfect place to do that at TED. Thanks.
So as researchers, something we often do is use immense resources to achieve certain capabilities or achieve certain goals. And this is essential to the progress of science or exploration of what is possible. But it sort of creates this unfortunate situation where a tiny, tiny fraction of the world can actually participate in this exploration or can benefit from that technology. And something that motivates me and what gets me really excited about my research is when I see simple opportunities to drastically change that distribution and make the technology accessible to a much wider percentage of the population. And I'm going to show you 2 videos that have gotten a lot of attention recently that I think embody this philosophy. And they actually use the Nintendo Wii remote. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with this device, it's a $40 video game controller. And it's mostly advertised for its motion sensing capability, so you can swing a tennis racket or hit a baseball bat. But what actually interests me a lot more is the fact that in the tip of each controller is a relatively high-performing infrared camera. And I'm going to show you 2 demos of why this is useful. So here I have my computer set up with a projector, and I have a Wii remote sitting on top of it. And if, for example, if you're in a school that doesn't have a lot of money, which is probably a lot of schools, or if you're in an office environment and you want an interactive whiteboard, normally these cost about $2,000 to $3,000. So what I'm going to show you how to do it is how to create one with a Wii remote. Now, this requires another piece of hardware, which is this infrared pen. You can probably make this yourself for about $5 with a quick trip of a Radio Shack. It's essentially got a battery, a button, and an infrared LED, and it turns on. You guys can't see it, but it turns on whenever I push the button. Now, what this means is that if I run this piece of software, I can now register the camera sees the infrared dot, and I can register the location of the camera pixels to the projector pixels, and now this is an interactive whiteboard surface. So for about $50 of hardware, you can have your own whiteboard. This is Adobe Photoshop. Thank you. Now, the software for this I've actually put on my website and have let people download it for free. In the 3 months that this project has been public, it's been downloaded over 500,000 times. So teachers and students all around the world are already using this. I want to quickly say that although it does do it for $50, there are some limitations of this approach, but you get about 80% of the way there for about 1% of the cost. Another nice thing is that a camera can see multiple dots, so this is actually a multi-touch interactive whiteboard system as well. For the second demo, I have this Wii remote that's actually next to the TV, so it's pointing away from the display rather than pointing at the display. And why this is interesting, here they are, is that if you put on, say, a pair of safety glasses that have 2 infrared dots in them, what these 2 dots are essentially going to give you is give the computer an approximation of your head location. And why this is interesting is I have this little application running on the computer monitor, which has a 3D room with some targets floating in it. And you can see that it looks like a 3D room. If you can see, like a video game, it sort of looks 3D, but for the most part, the image looks pretty flat and bound to the surface of the screen. But if we turn on head tracking, the computer can change the image that's on the screen and make it respond to the head movement. So let's switch back to that. So this has actually been a little bit startling to the game development community. Because this is about $10 of additional hardware if you already have a Nintendo Wii. So I'm looking forward to seeing some games with it. And actually, Lewis Castle, sitting down there, last week announced that Electronic Arts, one of the largest game publishers, is releasing a game in May that has a little Easter egg feature for supporting this type of head tracking. So in less than 5 months, it went from a prototype in my lab to a major commercial product. Thank you. But actually, to me, what's almost more interesting than either of these two projects is how people actually found out about them. YouTube has really changed the way or changed the speed in which a single individual can actually spread an idea around the world. I'm just a researcher in my lab with a video camera, and within the first week, 1 million people had seen this work. And literally within days, engineers, teachers, and students from around the world were already posting their own YouTube videos of them using my system or derivatives of this work. So I hope to see more of that in the future and hope online video distribution to be embraced by the research community. So thank you very much.
Why can't a sales meeting also have an inspiring taste of Paris? Why should honeymooners and blissfully unplugged people on vacation be the only ones with giant smiles wandering our lobbies? When you check into a Renaissance hotel in any part of the world, you should be greeted by a world of amenity.
Well, we got a little taste of a third video there too, so why not, okay? So, one lone nut has made millions of people smile because they've seen that video online in a format that obviously no one other than the people at that conference or that concert would have otherwise seen. So maybe you want to go be that lone nut this afternoon, or maybe you want to join the next lone nut that you see just for the fun of it, see where it goes. You never know. And on the other part, a guy that really wasn't satisfied with his Wii decided to change the world of video gaming. Pretty dynamic for a little piece of hardware you can pick up on the shelf for, $200, $100 on eBay. So the next presenter, Jim Ost, class of '91, How Greatness Emerges from Social Networks, touching on the two great topics of our time, social media, which is taking our time away from us at an accelerating pace, and healthcare, which is giving it back at an ever increasing rate. Jim Ost, class 91.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming out and listening to my talk today on how greatness emerges from social networks. I'm a researcher, and I study social networks, and my expertise is studying social networks within the world of science, in particular, the world of medicine. And I've been trying to examine how do these medical researchers that rise to prominence and gain admiration and respect, how do they get there? How do they get so well recognized, and how do they influence so many others? And what I found through almost a decade of research is that it's pretty surprising and pretty fascinating what's really happening, the mechanism that causes these individuals to rise to greatness. So the first person that we all think about when we think about greatness is Albert Einstein. And we also think about Albert Einstein for being a genius. His name, Einstein, is synonymous with genius. So that leads us to believe that the greatness somehow comes out of Einstein, that it's just held within his brain. And in fact, what have people done? Researchers, after Einstein passed, took his brain and tried to study it to see if they could clone it, maybe reproduce it. And if you could reproduce that brain, the thought is you could reproduce the greatness. But I think this is folly. I don't think this is true. And I don't think this is true because there are scientists and there are great people who are smarter than Einstein, who have never realized that kind of admiration and that kind of success. There's the smartest man in America right now has an IQ of 200, and he's a bouncer in a bar. I've seen interviews with this individual. He doesn't want to be a bouncer in a bar. He wants to be an academic, but he's not welcome in the world of academia because he lacks the social skills of someone like Einstein. So Einstein was not only a genius, but he was socially gifted as well. So that gets me, while we're on the topic of IQ, I want to look at two distributions here. The first distribution we all know very well, the bell curve distribution on the left side of the slide. This distribution reflects the distribution associated with intelligence. And what's interesting about this distribution is that from the top end of the scale to the bottom end of the scale, it shows that people aren't that tremendously different. From average to maybe the top end of the scale, we have individuals that might be twice as smart, but we don't have individuals that are 100 times or 1,000 times as smart. But if you shift your focus to the next distribution on the other side of the slide, the Pareto distribution, otherwise known as the 80-20 rule or the power law distribution, what we see is this is a distribution of wealth and other measures of performance. It's called the 80-20 rule because one example is 20% of the population, the richest people, possess 80% of the wealth. And if you look at scientists, 20% of the scientific authors write 80% of the publications. And if we actually look at the numbers, the average scientist is writing 1 to 5 publications, while the top scientists in their field are writing hundreds, or maybe even as many as 1,000. So if you have somebody with just a little bit more intelligence, not that much different, and by the way, the Gaussian distribution or bell curve also is reflective of how many hours people work in a week, the distribution of hours worked in a week. So if you look at people not being that much smarter, not working that much more hours in a week, well, how do they write so many more papers? How do they do so much more? How do they earn so much more money? And I think one signal that you see in the power law distribution is the fact that this is a signature of network activity at place. And the networks that we're talking about in the world of science are social networks. So I want to switch gears for a second and talk about how greatness actually happens, how the great discoveries that we all know, how do they actually happen? So Isaac Asimov had an observation here that actually many scientists have had who have studied scientific communities, that these discoveries were accidents. They're random occurrences. And if you really look at the history of a lot of these scientific discoveries, you'll see that scientists all over the world are trying to solve something. They're looking for that hidden truth, and they stumble upon this discovery. But later, I think when they tell the story of how they did the discovery, they romanticize it a little bit, maybe glorify what they actually did. But I really look at these scientific communities almost as search parties. And the search parties are spreading out, looking for that hidden or elusive truth that they're pursuing until one member of the search party stumbles upon that truth. Now, at best, these scientists are well trained and well prepared enough to find the thing when they see it. So we can credit them with that. But most of the rest is trial and error, randomness. So once somebody finds it, what happens then? Once somebody makes the find? Well, famous sociologist who studied the world of science, Robert Merton, said that it's the eminent scientists that often get the credit. So if you've ever been a graduate student that's had a little fine in a lab somewhere, you probably realized it was the professor or the head of the lab or maybe the head of the university, head of the academic institution that made the find. And this might not just be the eminent scientist taking all the credit. It might be the scientific community itself saying it couldn't have been that lowly graduate student. It had to be this eminent scientist that actually did it. So we see credit going to these top scientists. Now, the interesting thing is we go back to Einstein. Guess what? Theory of relativity, many people think that Einstein didn't discover that. In fact, some people think it was Henri Poincaré, a great French scientist and mathematician, that made that discovery. And then Einstein came across it later. So what did Einstein do that was so great? And this is where I think the greatness comes from, that makes it worth it that we give the credit to some of these scientists like Einstein. This is how the greatness emerges. An individual like Einstein made the discovery of relativity, supposedly, in 1905 and published it, but immediately was ridiculed for that. And you have to think about Einstein for a second. He was a German Jew during the time of Hitler. And they ridiculed him so much, they actually said that relativity was Jew science. This is pretty horrible. These are scientists. These are supposed to be the most impressive people that are ridiculing that way. And as the theories start to gain momentum and they start to get more accepted, it starts to threaten the status quo. And the scientists that are the leaders of the time, they get threatened by this. They don't want to lose their leadership position. So then they violently oppose this new discovery. So Einstein has to battle through this. And what happens for most scientists, they go their whole career and they die before they ever see acceptance. So that theory is left laying out there for somebody else to come along and discover. And that's what Einstein might have done. He might have found an old theory, polished it up, and then taken it through decades of the early 1900s to try and get acceptance from the scientific community. It took him 35 years, and for his other discoveries as well. So finally, these theories are accepted as self-evident, and guess what? Everybody forgets about how they dragged these poor scientists through the mud for all those years en route. So how does Einstein get this acceptance? I want to show you a picture of a social network. So social network diagrams, visualizations are comprised of nodes, which are the dots, which represent people, and the links, which are lines that relate to the relationships. And what we find is that the people that popularize a theory, gain acceptance to a new idea, these are people that are always well-connected and well-positioned. So this has been a finding through some of the research that we've been doing in my institution, that it's these people that go on to really be associated with success, admiration, respect, celebrity status in their field. And to get there, I think, is the real big question. How do you get to the point where you're extremely well-connected and well-positioned? The other interesting thing about this is, guess what? The network links distribute according to what distribution? The power law distribution. So there are 20% of people that are getting 80% of the links to everybody else in the network that are that highly connected. So why is it so important for a scientist or for the rest of us to be well-connected and well-positioned in a social network? Well, first of all, these individuals can transmit information. So they can have a new idea, transmit that new information to others, and inspire the others to transmit it, and so on, and as it spreads through the network. And using the power of a social network, you can spread ideas, as we're spreading through these TED presentations. Within just a couple degrees of separation, you can spread it to thousands or millions of people. It's exponential growth. And then the other thing these scientists do is, because they're so well connected to the right people, they're receiving information. So they're a transmitter and a receiver. And when you're receiving such powerful information, you know who you should work with, you know what things you should study, you should know how to solve problems, or you might know solutions to problems that other people have tried to solve, maybe in different applications. So all that information that you're deriving from the network is so powerful for your success. So what can we do to build those kind of connections, to rise to the level of being well-connected and extremely well-positioned? I advocate to people to implement a social network strategy. And a lot of people kind of take this for granted. They build relationships, but they don't make an active effort, especially scientists. A lot of scientists think, I'll just file myself away in a laboratory and search for the cure for cancer, and I'll do it. I have a plan, I'm going to do it. But they also need to get out and talk to people. They need to go to society meetings. And the same is true with us. If we want to have success and we want to rise up that power law distribution and have exponential increases in our success, we need to build a social network strategy. So it starts with intentions. Now this is another big problem. Social networks are a sexy term these days, and a lot of people are trying to do social network strategies, but then they do it because they want to make lots of money. They want to be a billionaire like the Facebook founder. But the intentions are all wrong. You need the intentions of trying to build the relationship. That should be your intentions. And your other intentions should be aligned with the social network. Often when you're just focused on making money, you're doing it at the expense of the others in the network. So you're immediately putting yourself on the wrong foot. Once you have the right intentions, you have to move through a couple steps here, a few steps. First, identify the right people. You have to take, unlike what you probably think of when you think of Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, you don't have thousands and thousands of friends. You can only build so many really strong relationships. You can only manage so many strong relationships because you're worried about what that person thinks about you and what you think about them. So you have to identify small numbers of people that you're going to go out and actively build relationships with that might help you achieve a goal. It might be a scientific discovery, but you're kind of creating that search party for success. Then you have to learn about these individuals. You have to learn, and this, I'm probably telling you the obvious here, you have to understand what makes these people tick and what's important to them and what do you have that could benefit them and what do they have that can benefit you. And then finally you have to behave. Now this, I think, is the hardest piece of all because we often think, well, I'll just be really nice. I won't be a jerk. Obviously you don't want to be a jerk if, to get people like you. So, but what we find is that being overly nice isn't a way to win friends and build relationships either. So finally, I would just say that we have this overarching area of interactions. As you interact with the networks, you'll constantly revise your plan and be better. But you have to implement a social network strategy in order to have that success. So to conclude, I'll say Einstein knew something extremely valuable. He knew that he and other very successful people know that people do not do great things alone. Thank you very much.
Jim, thank you. Hey, Jim. Up next, Professor Kristen Jellison, who is going to talk about working together to solve the water crisis. Kristen is an associate professor in our Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, and we're happy to have her here with us today. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you. Thank you. So I am an associate professor here at Lehigh in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, and my research is on the prevention of waterborne disease. So I look at ways to make our drinking water cleaner, and one particular focus of my research is on water treatment technologies for developing countries. So what I'm hoping to accomplish in the next 10 minutes is to make you aware, if you weren't already, that we are in the midst of a world water crisis, and to talk about my approach, what I think our approach should be in order to solve that. And it follows very nicely from the last talk, which wasn't planned, which is that we have to work together to do that. People, to do great things, you can't work alone, and that's really the goal of what I'm trying to say here. So this image shows you the volume of water that we have available on Earth and compares it to the size of our Earth. And when you look at this image, you might immediately think, wow, we don't really have that much water. But it's a little bit deceiving. That sphere of water on this image is actually quite large. And it has a diameter of about 860 miles. So that's a lot of water. But this includes all of the water that we have on Earth. So it's the water that's in our atmosphere, it's the water in our oceans, in our freshwater lakes and rivers and streams, in our groundwater, locked in glaciers, even in our bodies. So not all of that water is available for drinking. And that's what I'm going to focus on here. If you think about the water we can tap into for drinking, and for our purposes I'm talking about fresh water, surface water, and groundwater, it's really about 1% of that sphere. So it's actually not all that much. And as our world population continues to grow, the amount of water available per person is going to continuously decrease. And as we continue to generate waste, the quality of that water is also going down. So this map was derived from the United Nations Development Fund. And basically what it's showing you, the color coding, is the percent of the population that has access to an improved water source. So an improved water source is a water source that goes through some form of treatment before you consume it. And we're very lucky to live in a part of the world where almost all of us can turn on the tap and we have safe water. But if you look at this, you can see there's a large proportion of our globe that does not have that luxury. Areas where this is a really big issue are Africa, parts of Asia, and then Central and South America. So some staggering statistics, these are from the United Nations, are that there's about 1 billion people in the world who do not have access to safe water. So considering that our global population is now right around 7 billion, that's 1 in every 7 people on Earth do not have access to safe water. And twice that number of people, so almost 2 billion people, don't have adequate sanitation, which means the water that they are using, they're making dirty by washing or cooking, bathing. All of that dirty water goes back into the environment without being treated. It also means that the garbage that they're producing, the human waste they're producing, also goes into the environment. So that when it rains, that all gets washed into the waterways. And the end result is that our water supplies are getting dirtier over time. So this is not a cycle that's likely to end anytime soon. This means that about 2 million people die every year because of water-related diseases, and that translates to more than 5,000 people per day, and about 90% of those people are children under the age of 5. So it's pretty staggering. It's estimated that at any one time, about half of the world's hospital beds are occupied by people suffering from a water-related disease, and also about half of the developing world population is suffering from a water-related disease. And that leads to over 400 million school days lost every year, also work days lost by their parents. So it's affecting not only quality of life, but also productivity and poverty. And it's a cycle of poverty and sickness that needs some intervention in order to change. Okay. We are at no loss for technical solutions to this problem. There are solutions that have been designed from the most basic, where all you need is a bucket and the sun, to very, very complex, sophisticated systems where you're looking at materials that filter at the nanoscale. Every part of that spectrum, we have some sort of technology that's been designed. And yet we still have this problem. And my point is that technology alone is not going to solve this issue. This is an issue that needs a more holistic approach, and we absolutely need to be working together. So to give you some examples of this, I'm going to use one particular technology that I'm very familiar with, which is the biosand filter. I do a lot of research on this filter. And so this is a schematic of it. This is, you can see the size of it. It's about the size of a small child. So on me, it comes up to about my waist. It's about 1 square foot in plan view. And it's basically a concrete box, and it's filled with sand and gravel. That's it. And all the user has to do is pour dirty water in the top, it filters through the sand, and you get clean water out of the effluent pipe. It's been shown in numerous field and lab studies to be very effective. It reduces bacteria, parasites, all different sorts of pathogens. It has an effect on waterborne diarrheal disease. It's an effective technology and super simple. So there are some manufacturing and distribution costs associated with this, which has limited its distribution worldwide. But you would think, if we can overcome those, so if somebody could donate these to a community where they don't have to pay anything, you just give it to the community, and this is a community that's suffering from waterborne disease, they would use it. Common sense would tell you, of course they would use it. You've given it to them, they'll use it. And maybe you're not surprised by this, but I was surprised that no, that's not always true. So what you're seeing here, this is a biosand filter that was given to a community in Honduras a couple years after Hurricane Mitch hit in 1999 and damaged the town's water supply system. So a humanitarian group came in and gave them a filter. And then we came in a couple years later, and this is what we found. In a town of 120 households, there was one filter left, and this was it. It was crammed in a corner, it was taken apart, it was not being used. This is a town that was suffering from water-related diseases. The doctor told us 50% of the cases he saw were people who were suffering from diarrhea related to contaminated water. And yet, they were given the filter and nobody used it. Why? Well, this is a poor community and they have a lot of problems. So water is just one of them. And the money they could get from selling the filters was more beneficial, they thought, higher priority than clean water. So a lot of them sold the filter. Another issue is that this community didn't believe, some of them didn't believe that the water was the source of the disease. Because the water actually didn't look all that dirty, but water doesn't have to look dirty to be contaminated. So they didn't think their water was an issue. And again, they would get rid of the filter, sell it, or use it as a tabletop. They weren't getting used. So obviously there's some education component that has to go into this. You have to be able to explain to people not only how your technology works and how they should use it and maintain it, but why should they use it? Why is it worth their time and their effort? Why is it worth a behavior change to do this? What impact is it going to have on their lives? As an engineer, I will be the first to admit that's not my skill set. How do I design an educational campaign? I could probably come up with some things that should be in the content of the educational campaign, but who am I to say who should deliver that? It probably shouldn't be the rich white engineer. It should probably be somebody respected in the local community, but who is that? It probably, from one community to the next, might depend on whether this should be written material, oral material, whether it should be delivered in the schools, household to household, in community meetings. The way you deliver these campaigns is going to vary from one community to the next, and engineers who develop the technical solutions are not the ones to figure that out. You have to work with people who understand how to do that effectively, and that was a big problem in this case. Switching gears for a moment, one thing in my lab that we've been doing for the past couple years, this is the concrete filter. One problem with this, I mentioned they're big. When they're filled with water and sand, they weigh about 300 pounds. So getting these out to people who live in very remote regions can be a challenge. And they're also, they're a little bit costly in terms of their manufacturing and distribution. They can cost anywhere from about 30 to 100 US dollars to manufacture and distribute, which doesn't sound like a lot when you think there's no consumables, you don't have to buy anything afterwards. But for people who live on $1 a day, that's a lot. So you can't really distribute these without some sort of subsidy, some sort of subsidized program. So in my lab, we're looking at ways to scale it down. We've scaled it down into a 5-gallon bucket size and a 2-gallon bucket size to see if we can make these smaller and cheaper and get them out to a larger global market. And you can't really see here, the lighting's not that great, but this is water that came out of, this is the starting water, and this is the water that came out of our concrete filter and then our bucket filters. And you can see they're working really well. So my thought as an engineer was, let's make them as cheap as possible. Let's design it so these are as cheap as possible so everyone can afford them. That'll have the biggest impact. And I was shocked to learn when I went to a conference that that's absolutely the worst thing that you could do. If you make these cheap so that the poorest of the poor can afford them, the middle class won't want them because they have a stigma associated with them that they're for poor people. And the poor people don't want them because they don't want to be stigmatized as being poor. So you have to market these and price them so that people value them, that they can earn it if they work for it, but they can't, it's not just a given that they're going to be able to have it. Again, as a technical person, as an engineer, that's not my skill set to figure out how do you market these, how do you price them so that people will want the technology and they'll use it. You have to work with people who can understand that aspect of the project and market and distribute these things accordingly. And the last thing I just want to talk about is community participation. You really, really need to work with the community and hear what they have to say. What are their community perspectives on water? How do they use water? What are their behavioral and social norms around water collection and water use? What are their local materials that are available? What can they afford to pay? All of this information is really important in order to design an effective solution. And yet usually the people you want to be talking to are the women, because women tend to be the water managers. They're the water fetchers, they're the water users. They know the most about water systems. But in a lot of these communities, it's a patriarchal society getting to the women and getting them to feel comfortable talking, asking the right questions, framing the questions so that they feel like they can give a good answer. It's very challenging. So you have to work with social scientists who can help you figure out how to do this in a culturally sensitive way, how to ask the questions, how to design the survey questions and implement the survey so that you're actually getting the information you intended to get. This is all really very specific skill set, again, that a technical engineer doesn't have. And so I'll just finish by saying, if this is our goal, and I think most of us who go into these projects, we are good-hearted and good intention. We want to bring clean water to people. But if this is the goal, we have to work together, because bringing safe water to people, there's a whole lot of other issues that have to be considered. It's not just the technology. And we have to start thinking about these projects as multidisciplinary, holistic efforts. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you.
That was awesome.
I'll take this back.
Yeah, that's fine. So maybe instead of those water jugs that we have set out all over campus, we should start using some of these and get a real feel for what that experience is like for people, and maybe that'll inform our decision making about how we approach those problems in the future. Up next is something completely different. We've got Casey Rule, class of 11, who's going to do a musical performance for us and tell us a little bit about his experience that led him to being here today and doing that for us. Stage is yours, Casey.
Hi, so I'm, oh, that's very loud. Hi, I'm Casey Rule. I just finished my 5th and final year at Lehigh. I'm going off into the real world. It's a little scary. I'm actually going to be working in Easton next year, working for a company that does math education software. A great family-run company. The software, it's mostly intended for inner-city students to try to get them more enthusiastic about learning. Something I'm really excited about. But this year, I actually spent most of the year on music. Now, if you looked in your program, you probably saw that I am an ideas major. That usually takes some people off guard. First of all, I assure you that is a real degree. It's an acronym. It's an integrated degree in engineering, arts, and sciences. And my favorite thing about it is that I get to go to job interviews, and or my job interviews, I got to say that I have a BS degree in ideas. And that's always a great icebreaker. So the idea behind ideas, it's about finding the overlap between arts and science and engineering. And actually, the presentation before me illustrated a great example of where that overlap is. So my particular concentration was music composition and computer science. And whenever I tell people about that, the reaction is always, oh, what an unusual combination. But in my mind, it makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot of overlap. I think for a lot of people, the artsy and the engineer are two very distinct archetypes. But in my mind, they've always been very close. For me, it's always about trying to find that balance between convention and innovation. And in both fields, I think that the main driving force and the thing that makes me passionate about both these fields is the opportunity to exercise creativity. Now, one of the things I was asked to talk about today was the creative process as a musician. And I have to say, what creativity is something that I've thought a lot about, because, you know, I'm a musician and that's what we do. We think about what creativity is. And I think it's a term that has been sort of disproportionately applied to the arts. However, in my mind, creativity, what that is, it's the drive to contribute to the overall human experience. And sometimes you do it through music, and sometimes you do it through programming, sometimes engineering, business, medicine, theology, education. But I think it's all the same drive. Everyone here, I think, is driven by that same creativity, and creativity is about finding what our contribution as 1 in 7 billion, what our contribution is going to be to the overall human experience. Now, this is actually a rather lofty introduction to what I have to admit is not a particularly lofty piece of music. I'm going to be performing a piece that is a setting from a collection of poems called Mother Goose for Grown-Ups. I don't know about you, but around 3 o'clock, particularly after a big lunch like we had on the UC front lawn, I'm ready to fall asleep. So I wanted to make sure that I had something fun and lighthearted, albeit a little silly. So this is a text by Guy Wetmore Carroll. He was a late 19th century humorist and poet, American. And the piece that I'm going to be performing is my setting of the embarrassing episode of Little Miss Muffet. Now, full disclosure, I am not a pianist, but I couldn't find one on such short notice, so I'm going to do my best to fake it, so just bear with me. Little Miss Muffet discovered a tuffet which never occurred to the rest of us. And as 'twas a June day and just about noonday, she wanted to eat like the best of us. Her diet was whey, and I hasten to say it is wholesome and people grow fat on it. The spot being lonely, the lady not only discovered the tuffet but sat on it. A rivulet gabbled beside her and babbled, as rivulets often are thought to do. And dragonflies sported around and cavorted, as poets say dragonflies ought to do. When glancing aside, for a moment she spied a horrible sight that brought fear to her. A hideous spider was sitting beside her, and most unavoidably near to her. Albeit unsightly, the creature politely said, "Madam, I earnestly vow to you, I'm penitent that I did not bring my hat. I should otherwise certainly bow to you." Though anxious to please, he was so ill at ease that he lost all his sense of propriety, and grew so inept that he clumsily stepped in her plate, which is barred in society. This curious error completed her terror. She shuddered, and turning much paler, not only left Tuffet, but dealt him a buffet, which doubled him up in a sailor knot. It should be explained that at this he was pained. He cried, "I have vexed you, no doubt of it. Your fist like a truncheon, you're still in my luncheon," was all that she uttered. "Get out of it." And the moral is this: be it madam or miss, to whom you have something to say, you are only absurd when you get in the curd, but you're rude when you get in the way.
Yeah, there's not a single face not smiling in this room right now. That was great. 48 hours from now, our next presenter will have nobody in front of him in line to become a senior at Lehigh. Bryan Hughes will be talking about immersion in service. Bryan?
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. And today I'm just going to be talking a little bit about the benefits of completely immersing yourself. That's physically, personally, mentally, in community service. And it's to the point where maybe I might even provoke the thought that those who serve benefit more than those being served. Because I believe community service is the best representation of the symbiotic capacity of humanity. So let's first define service. These are the direct man hours of time spent directly providing a service. Now this might be hard physical manual labor for which you have no prior qualifications. But the point is that you're seeing, you're being, and you're feeling that change in the community that you want to see happen. This kind of volunteerism has came a long way in the past few decades. Now high schoolers need on their resume to be competitive for college some kind of service or service experience, because colleges now see this service as invaluable as well. And then even corporations take it as a social responsibility to turn their profits into a more distributed prosperity, which also leads to my second definition here. Philanthropy is fundraising and or donating of money, goods, essential needs like food, clothing, etc. And these things are not mutually exclusive. You need money to be able to provide service. But anyway, it's not exactly how we provide service, but why. Why do we do this? Why is this more popular nowadays? And the simple explanation could be because there are others in need. And that's a perfect explanation. We help people because there are people that need our help. But economists would say that humans behave based on incentive. So what's really in it for me? Why am I helping others? So for centuries, missionaries have traveled all over the globe as educators, health providers, businessmen, albeit perhaps for eternal life in heaven. That might be their motivation. But for the sake of my presentation, they all had a set of values that they wanted to live by, and they were religious values. And I'm not saying I'm a missionary, but in the past 6 years, I've been on 6 week-long service trips, and the first 4 of which were through my church in high school. But I've since come to college. I've joined a fraternity that has its own set of values, the diffusion of liberal culture, and this isn't just tolerating, but accepting and inviting a more diverse lifestyle, the advancement of justice, which includes social justice, and then the development of character and the promotion of friendship. These are Delta Upsilon's 4 founding principles. And just looking at these principles, these are perfect embodiments of community service, especially when one is taken out of their comfort zone of college, that kind of bubble of Lehigh especially, and taken to a different environment that's very different, obviously, from theirs. So the Global Service Initiative is something that Delta Upsilon started in 2010 with 10 brothers from all over the US and Canada. And then in 2011, when I went, there were 20, and now this year there's 40 brothers. We're all being sent to Negril, Jamaica, to build cafeterias for elementary schools or other type services that's focused on the youth of the country, so that as college students we can kind of be seen as role models. And as I say, the future is with the youth. So we figure that helping these young people in their vulnerable state can lead to even bigger change in the future. So just a little more background of this different kind of environment. In the US, we are 65% white, non-Hispanic. In Jamaica, there's only a 2% white population. In fact, 91% are black. And the difference in per capita there is pretty obvious. That's 1/5 of the US. The literacy here is 99%, and the literacy there is 87%. But the definition of literacy is actually just anyone over the age of 15 that's been to school, ever. And then the unemployment there is self-evident. But there's also a language barrier. The official language in Jamaica is English, but there's also a slang that's very present called patois. It's kind of a pseudo-French, English mix. So DU has provided kind of a 3-minute video to kind of give some more context of what we've been doing down there. So if Dave could play the video.
My name is Mrs. Martin. I'm the principal of the Keto Early Childhood Institute. And we are so happy to have these students coming on board to help us along with Kay and Justin and others. We are so excited. Right now, my heart is filled with tears.
The main reason I came on this trip is because I have previous experience with this kind of work, and it was really one of the best experiences in my life. I got to learn a lot about myself. I feel like doing this kind of stuff is really good for anyone that does it.
The 4 principles are ever present in the GSI. The main one that sticks out to me is the diffusion of liberal culture, though. And to me, part of diffusing your liberal culture is not just experiencing the culture, it's taking a part of it back and making it your own. And through this trip, I'm now going to, after watching the Jamaican people and how they have so little, but yet they're still so thankful, I'm going to now take part in take joy in everything I have, because I know now how privileged I truly am.
Here at the Credo Primary School, we get to see how it really is like to come to school, and even though it's a private school, they are nothing compared to even a public school here in the United States. So by just being able to lay down a floor, paint the walls, and just be able to accommodate their needs a little bit better than what they already have, that's what we've basically been trying to do today. And hopefully these kids can have a place to actually eat, which is what we're building now, is in addition to the actual school they're having now, is a facility where they can actually host meals and stuff.
The Jamaican people, I've realized so far, are just very, very passionate people. They're very religious people and faithful people. And because of that, they realize, the time that we're taking to help them here, they really see it as kind of like a gift from God. And that's just extremely fulfilling to me, that I can kind of answer some of their prayers just by working here for a week and putting all my effort into it.
We hope to have you guys coming in to do still much more for us, because there are many more to be done. But for now, we thank you so much for your great support, and we're looking forward in having you coming on board to help us to do much more, because we are greatly in need of much more. Thank you very much.
So I hope that provided a lot of context for everyone. So every day after we would work on these work sites, we would come back and have a reflection in a group setting. There was also a journal that people could write in at their leisure. And so all of this was kind of helping us learn more about ourselves through this experience. It was also a global experience in an ever increasingly globalized world. This is very important for someone of my age. It also provided open-mindedness in a world that's also diverse, which leads to awareness, which can be the basis for positive activism, and also a curiosity, so for other places in the world that might need our service. And finally, it's kind of a workforce requirement in a competitive environment, this global experience, to the point where DU has realized that all of their undergraduates deserve an experience like this at some point in the future. So hopefully I've inspired you all to live a life of service. Thank you.
Thanks, Bryan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bryan. Our next presenter is Professor George White on urban school reform through community involvement. George is a professor of educational leadership in Lehigh's very own College of Education up on the mountain. George?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good day. Hope you're all enjoying your day and the beautiful weather that we're having here. One of the things that I want to talk about is to build on some of the experiences that you've all had since you've been here and listening to some of these TED Talks this morning, especially around connectivity and service. One of the things that we talk about all the time when we talk about educational reform is fixing schools. And as you look here, that's the first phase that we think about. So how many of you actually have been involved or have had your children in an urban school environment? If you could see a show of hands. Yeah, not many, not many. And yet we talk all the time about fixing these broken schools. How do we know they're broken? Broken in relationship to what? Okay? Is it the school that's broken, or is it the community that is in need of change? So when we talk about urban school reform, it's not enough to just focus on the unique aspect of the individual school, because those kids come from somewhere and they go to somewhere every day. And we have them in public schools, in private schools, for 180 days maximum during a school year, right? So think about that. We're saying we're going to fix education. We're going to fix these kids in 180 days in 6.5 hours, each of those 180 days. I contend that that's a mistake. I contend that if we try to fix the school, we're going to be failures. And we've seen it over and over and over again. If you look at places where most of your children went to school, they were successful partially because of the school, but they were successful partially because of the community. And so it's not about fixing schools, it's about developing communities. And I want to go one step further and say it's not about developing communities, because that implies that we do something to the community. Really, it's about helping communities build the capacity to grow and transform themselves. And so my talk today is about just that. It's about transforming urban schools and using a systems approach. We've heard earlier about we can't fix water supplies with just an engineer, that we need multiple perspectives. Well, we can't fix schools with just teachers. I was naive enough when I first entered this work to think all we really have to do is to fix the principals. If we can get the principals to know the right thing and to do the right thing, we'll fix those schools. Wrong. Schools are made up of multiple systems: interactive, parents, community, health, family, students, teachers, all interacting together. And if we just try to pluck off one of those, let's say we're going to make better teachers, is that going to fix the schools? Probably not. What we really need to do is to understand that it is a systems approach. Clearly, we need to have some foundational elements. The first of those is we have to have a curriculum that's rigorous and relevant, right? Not boring, not rote, but rigorous and relevant. To the kids who are struggling the most, we have to challenge the most. Instead of giving them the McGuffey reader that many of us had when we went to school and learned to see Jim run or see Spot chase the cat, we need to give them really rigorous material. We can teach kids in elementary schools higher order math. We can teach kids how to think if we expect them and provide them the skills necessary. And it has to be relevant. It has to meet their needs, not just our needs. The second area is that the instruction has to be both leveled, it has to meet your level where you are at the point in time. So teaching to a group like this isn't going to make it. It's really focusing on the individual need and mass customizing the opportunity. But it also has to be relational. I have to be able to connect with you. All of us, think about the person in your mind who was the best teacher you ever had. I would tell you they probably were very rigorous and demanded a lot of you, but they also connected individually with you. You felt that they were related to you. They understood you. They had a sense of who you are and where you were going. So it's not enough for me to just stand up here or a teacher to just stand up and do a presentation. Leveled and relational instruction. Engaging. Not a do to, but have kids learn to do with, right? That's the important thing. Getting kids to be actively engaged and participants in their own learning is an important, critical aspect. You can't start that at 11th grade, right? If we've taught kids to sit and be quiet and listen and take notes from kindergarten to 11th grade, and then we say to them, oh, now we want you to do the following, isn't going to happen. The best instruction that I've ever seen is a kindergarten teacher who gets kids engaged in the learning. Ask them the questions. Ask them to think about things that they haven't been thinking about before. And we have to make sure that the kids that go to our schools are going to school in a healthy, safe environment. Big topic right now, many of you are hearing about, is bullying. Gang involvement in our urban communities. Lots of things. If I have to walk to school every morning worried about whether I'm going to get there, whether I'm going to get beaten up, the chances of me being able to think about and focus on how to factor a quadratic equation go down substantially. Notice that all of that takes place before they get to school, right? So, the point that we're saying is that school is part of a much larger system. And as we really begin to think about school reform, we need to begin to think about fixing and focusing on housing-related issues, health-related issues, and employability issues. Now we move into the community focus. And so we're talking, this is fairly complex, but I'll boil it down quickly, into an understanding, first of all, that whatever we do with, not to. Right? I'm the university professor. I know best. I'm coming into your community, and I'm going to tell you how to fix your urban schools. Guess what kind of reaction I get when I walk into those communities? Give us some money, thank you very much, and then get out of here. Right? But if we say to that individual, if we say to that community, tell us what your needs are. What is it that you see happening within your community that makes a difference? In the south side of Bethlehem, one of the big areas was asthma. We have kids, high levels of asthma. So now we have a community greenway where kids are not walking to school on the street with buses and traffic, but they're walking in an old revitalized railroad bed that has been now with trees, and the asthma rate, the loss of time from school has gone down substantially. So it's about building collaborative networks with people in the community to address those critical areas of housing, of workforce development, and health. Putting clinics in schools and allowing parents and kids to use those clinics so that they are healthy and are well fed and can maintain the time in school allows us then to use that relevant curriculum, allows us to have higher performing teachers so that they can move the bar forward. And so as we think about this, I want to give you 3 quick examples of that notion of not fixing schools, but really paying attention to building capacity in communities. The Harlem Children's Zone, Jeffrey Canada, has been featured many times. 60 Minutes most recently did a special on him where he took 97 blocks of Harlem And he said, we're going to make the school the focus of attention, but we're going to engage all kinds of different organizations. And they did a resource map to find out what resources existed in the community, what resources were needed in the community with community leaders. And they've been in business now for almost a decade. And what we're seeing is high school graduation rate coming out of the Harlem schools that at one point were in their 30% are now in the 80% range. We fix communities, we work collaboratively with communities to make that happen. In our own backyard here in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania, we have what we call the Community Schools for Student Success, or COMPAS. The Greater Lehigh Valley United Way has collaborated bringing and establishing a community school involvement that puts clinics in schools, that engages hospitals, that engages workforce development, local business volunteer, local business engagement, and we now have 8 community schools operating in Bethlehem and in Allentown, and we're beginning to see those metrics of school readiness, of reduction in absenteeism, and student achievement starting to tick up because we're training parents, we're working on food service delivery, we're providing healthy environments for kids to learn. These all are connected then to a larger concept that is now looking at, from a public policy standpoint, creating what we call promise neighborhoods, where the money is coming from a variety of sources, business and industry, government sources, education sources, all being funneled into a community collaborative that is designed to address the needs of a school, but also the need of a specific area. It requires a whole community. So I'll leave you with this concept that says, if you recall the old African proverbs that it takes a community to raise a child, I think that that's passé. I think it takes a community to empower and build capacity in a community so that everyone in that community learns. So that it requires you and me to provide service in that community. It requires business and industry to commit to that community, and we need to do this neighborhood by neighborhood by neighborhood, and it has to be a collective venture. That's the work that we're doing right now at Lehigh. That's the work that's making a difference, and I appreciate your time and effort. And the last thing I would say to you is, raise your right hand high, please. Now, raise it a little higher. I want you to begin to make a promise to yourself and to us that you will make a commitment to whatever community you're in to be an active community member. Service is a part of being good citizens. So thank you for your time, thank you for your energy, and we'll have a good day.
That's great, George. Thank you. And our final presenter for the afternoon is Rabbi Seth Goren, who's going to talk about the person as sacred text.
Thanks, Steve.
Need it?
Oh. Thank you, Steve. As Steve mentioned, I'm going to be talking today about the person as sacred text. So to begin with, I want to point out that in English we have a number of idioms that refer to people as metaphorical books. We have expressions like, you can't judge a book by its cover, or you can read someone like an open book. Today I want to compare people to a specific type of book, namely sacred texts. Now we usually think about sacred texts as things like the Bible or the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita, or even a poem or a letter or an essay that has meant a great deal to us. I want to push us a little farther today and encourage us to think about people as sacred text for a number of different reasons. First of all, sacred texts are intertwined with the dual concepts of revelation and reception. That is to say that they have their provenance elsewhere, they transcend that distance, they are revealed to us, and we in turn receive them, drinking from them deeply. This can happen in a number of different ways. There are some texts that are passed down from generation to generation until they are revealed to us, we receive them, and then we in turn pass them on to others. At the same time, there are other sacred texts that are revealed to us directly from a source that we perceive to be divine and holy in nature. It's the same thing about people, that we have the possibility of receiving people when they reveal themselves to us, that we can hear what people have to offer, to hear out their stories, and to listen to the narratives that they have woven out of the events in their own lives. When we do this, we can really approach people in a different sort of way, that we really are able to see the core of who they are in a way that transcends, again, the distance that often separates us from others. In addition, sacred texts often typically require translation. Now, I want to concede for a moment that there is a certain power to the mystery of encountering a text in a language that we may not understand. This is a power that's embraced when we recognize that a text in a foreign language allows us to project our own understanding of that text onto it, that we can approach the text and kind of know, generally speaking, what this text is trying to communicate to us. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, we are taking our own understanding and engaging in the process of eisegesis. We are reading our own selves into this text. We think about this in the context of foreign language texts, but when it comes down to it, we also do the same thing with texts in our own language, in our own native tongues. That when we engage a text in our own native tongue, the text begs us at its foundation to examine, where does it come from? Who composed it and why? What is the journey that led this text from its origin to us, and what is the purpose that it is supposed to serve in our own lives? It's the same thing with people as well. Each of us has his or her own idiolect. Each of us speaks with his or her own nuances and subtleties in a way that ultimately is very difficult to convey to anyone else. This is important to acknowledge because we often feel like we're speaking the same language when in reality we are speaking our own language in and of ourselves. By acknowledging this and recognizing it, we can help to minimize confusion and help to reduce the possibility for misunderstanding that separates people from each other. By affirming people as sacred texts and accepting revelation and reception and translation as being at the core of how we encounter each other, we then take on certain obligations. As much as we would like to when we encounter texts or people that confound us or disturb us or that we see as sacrilegious, we cannot dismiss them. Instead, we're required to recognize and proceed from the assumption that there is holiness and reason behind them. It requires us to accept certain things about them and to ask questions. It requires us to ask, why does this person think this way? Or why is she acting that way? Or ultimately, why does this text make me feel uncomfortable? The idea of looking at people as sacred text is at its core something that may be unfamiliar to us. This may be something that we are not typically doing, but when we look at texts, we hold up texts in a very particular way, that we see them, and when people desecrate them or defile them, it naturally upsets us. I would suggest that it should upset us no less when we see a person demeaned or diminished or worse. People are sacred texts, and by accepting this, we have the possibility of welcoming them into our lives and welcoming their stories into who we are and creating a very different world from the one in which we live. Thank you for coming this afternoon, and have a wonderful afternoon.
So the TEDx facilitator guidelines state that I am absolutely not to even attempt to summarize what all of these presenters have given to you today, because no two people in this room would probably come to the same conclusion. There are 7 billion people on this planet. 6 of them stood up on this stage today and shared their thoughts, their wisdom, their experience, and what they're most passionate about and what they see as something that can be solved through human capacity in this world. That excites me. What you do from here is up to you. If they said something that spun off another thought in your head, I hope you act on it. I hope you find somebody to collaborate with. Lehigh is a fertile ground for those connections to be made. We're all here again because we wanted to be here in the first place. we're always welcome to come back anytime and participate fully in the life of the university. A graduation, a commencement ceremony, a reunion, these are all great moments in the transformation of the place, but one thing remains at the core. Lehigh was created as a place where we can indeed change the world. We had 6 of our people from this community come up on this stage today and tell us how they are going to enhance the world in which we live. I leave you today with the challenge. What are you going to do to meet their challenge? Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.